So we are in this series called The Seven Signs. And in the Gospel of John, there are 7 miracles or signs. And each is intended to reveal in a unique way the identity of Jesus. And so in this series, we're looking at each miracle 1 week at a time. And this is week 3, so we're going to look together at the 3rd sign. And as we've done every week so far, we've engaged in a very simple ancient custom where we honor the sacredness of Scripture, and out of reverence. Alicia, were you already starting to stand? I looked up and I was like, you look like you were like about to stand. So out of the reverence for Scripture, we call out Alicia on Sunday morning, which is your favorite thing in church, just to be called out. Christians have, down through the centuries, often stood for the reading of the Scriptures out of sacredness and reverence. So I'd like us to do that again this morning as we look at this morning's passage. Alicia, would you lead us in the standing? All right, this is John chapter 5, verses 1 to 9. It says, "Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, 'Do you want to get well?' 'Sir,' the invalid replied, 'I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me.' Then Jesus said to him, 'Get up, pick up your mat and walk.' At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked." Okay, you can be seated. So Jesus, we're told, is in Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals, and it's not specified. But we're told that he walks down to what's called the Pool of Bethesda. Modern archaeological excavations have uncovered what is believed to be the pool that's described here. It was located, as we're told in Scripture, near the sheep gate and also where it was excavated in Jerusalem. And this 2-pool complex was 25 feet deep, and it was as long as a football field. And it was surrounded by 5 roofed covered colonnades, which provided huge areas of shade from the Middle Eastern sun. Okay, now as you can imagine, this is a pretty nice little spot. And it was a natural gathering place in the 1st century. And apparently, a superstition developed about mysterious healing powers in these waters. Because every once in a blue moon, the waters of the pool would be stirred, undoubtedly caused by the springs that fed into the pool. But there were rumors that the stirrings were caused by angels, and that the first sick or diseased person into the water after it was stirred, for them it was like winter chicken dinner. Total healing. So the pool became a popular place for the blind and the lame. Because whatever your malady, if you could be around when the water was stirred, and you didn't know when that was going to happen, but if you could be around for it, and if somehow you could manage to be the first into the pool, maybe, just maybe, you could get healed. So at the edge of the pool sits this guy who's been paralyzed for 38 years. Okay, for 38 years, a handicapped parking permit has been hung in his car window. And he's basically reserved a parking spot at the Pool of Bethesda. So day in and day out, he begged for money from the bathers. And it was rare that they would ever even make eye contact. And probably even more rare that he ever actually got a handout. But the thing that kept him coming back was his hope of healing. If somehow, and who knows how, but if somehow he could be there on one of those rare occasions when the waters were stirred, and if somehow he could be the first into the water, oh man. And so this was his hope, this was his dream. Now the problem, of course, is if you're paralyzed, it's really, really hard to win a race into the water. But he keeps coming day after day anyway, hoping. So this has become his life, sitting by the pool, hoping beyond hope for a miracle. And on this day, Jesus comes over to him and he makes eye contact. He looks right at him. And Jesus asks him if he wants to get well. Now he's probably thinking, oh man, maybe this is the day. Maybe if the waters are stirred, this guy will pick me up and carry me down into the water. But Jesus doesn't help him get into the pool, because it isn't the power of the pool that's going to change this man's life. Jesus simply says, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And in an instant, the paralysis is gone. He gets up, picks up his mat, and walks away. And after 30 years, he gets his miracle, even though it didn't look anything like what he had imagined. Now, inside this little story, we see some powerful principles in play. And this isn't just a story about a man who lived 2,000 years ago. In a sense, this story is about you and me. And so I want us to walk through this morning 3 truths that we see here about you and me. And the first one is this: God makes the impossible possible. Now, we don't know the source of this man's problem. Maybe it was an accident he was in. Maybe it was an illness of some kind. Maybe it was a genetic issue that just sort of developed at one point in his life. But this man heard the words that changed his life one day: you'll never walk again. In fact, those words had echoed in his mind for 38 years. This man hadn't stood on his feet for nearly 4 decades. And I wonder if that's why Jesus singled this man out. He'd been sitting next to the Pool of Bethesda day after day, month after month, year after year, for longer than anyone could remember. But what a way for Jesus to show him that with Jesus, it's never too late. Because this invalid was out of referrals. I mean, his condition was incurable. His case was unsolvable. And yet, in the presence of Jesus, and this is what we're to get from this, in the presence of Jesus, there's no such thing. Nothing is unsolvable. Nothing is incurable. But often, our perception shapes our reality. In 1939, George Danzig enrolled as a grad student at Cal Berkeley. How many of you have ever heard of George Danzig? Have you ever heard of him? We are an educated group. I hadn't either. I just read about him like 2 weeks ago. He went on to do some amazing things, and I'll get into that in a minute. But he was studying statistics under a guy named Jerzy Neyman. And at the beginning of one class, Neyman put up on a blackboard 2 examples of famously unsolvable statistics problems. Okay, now, George Danzig rolled in late to class that particular day. So he thought that the problems on the board were the homework assignment. So he transcribed them into his notebook feverishly, and he took them home, and it was a really tough assignment, he found. And it took a lot longer than he expected or carved out time for. But George Danzig solved both of them. Now, this groundbreaking thing that he had done sort of catapulted him, and he became highly sought after. In World War II, he served the Air Force. As a civilian, he became the head of the Combat Analysis Branch. After the war, he became an advisor to the Defense Department. And in 1966, he became a professor at Stanford. And during his career, he received numerous awards, including the National Medal of Science in 1975, okay? And the tools that he went on to develop shape our world. The way airlines schedule their fleets, the way shipping companies deploy trucks, the way oil companies run refineries, the way businesses project revenue. The legacy of George Danzig is felt all over our world. Okay, but the emergence of his brilliance can really be traced back to one career-defining moment as a statistics student. And it's interesting because as he reflected on his life years later, he said, if someone had told me they were 2 famous unsolved problems, I probably wouldn't have even tried to solve them. We make too many assumptions about what is and what isn't possible. George Danzig solved unsolvable problems because he didn't know that it couldn't be done. And one of the reasons that we don't expect miracles, one of the reasons that we won't even ask God for them, is that we have predetermined through our logic or through our experience exactly what is and is not possible. Now, I'm not saying that, like, if we just believe, we can get whatever we want. I mean, experiencing the miraculous is more than just like the power of positive thinking. You know, reciting to yourself, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. It isn't always going to get the train up the tracks like the little engine that could. Okay, and this is certainly not some sort of Jedi mind trick. But I do think that Henry Ford was onto something when he said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. Our assumptions about what's possible can define reality. Now, for this invalid, he'd had his condition for 38 years. Year after year after year after year, nothing changed. Now, I don't know about you, but I would be tempted to give up hope. But this man goes to the pool one day, and it feels like every other day. It's the Middle East. It's hot. No one's paying attention to him. No one's looking at him. No one's making eye contact. This is like every other day, but out of nowhere comes Jesus. Jesus enters the scene, and suddenly this man is living in a new reality. An encounter with Jesus happens, and the impossible becomes possible. Now, here's what I think. I think that we can struggle with something for so long that we just give up hope. I think we can try and fail and try and fail and try and fail. And after a while, we just assume that the situation is impossible. Now, I don't know what you might think is wrong with you. I don't know what it is that you really would like for God to heal. You know, maybe it's your temper. Your whole life, you've just exploded on people. And those most hurt, you know, are the ones that you love the most, those nearest to you. And it's been years and years. It's just anger. Or maybe it's these paralyzing bouts of worry. Like when you look at the world, you see all that could go wrong, and you stress and you overreact, and at times you're frozen by it. Or maybe it's like social anxiety. You see the world around you, and it feels like everybody's dancing, but for whatever reason, you just can't seem to join in. And you've been sitting on the outside for years, and it's been so long, and it's been the same day after day, month after month, year after year. And so you're tempted to think, you know what, this is just how it is. I guess I better learn to live with it. Or maybe you have an addiction of some kind. Maybe it's a substance thing. Maybe it's a sexual thing. But you have battled it for so long, and it's gotten the best of you for so long that you think, you know what, nothing will ever change. It's impossible for me to ever be different. And I just want to say, it is absolutely never too late for you to become who you're supposed to be. This guy was not meant to be paralyzed. Even though he suffered for 38 years, he was meant to walk. He was meant to run. It is absolutely never too late to become who you're designed to be. Doesn't matter how long you've had the issue. As long as you're still breathing, God's not finished with you yet. You're never too far past your prime. And God is relentless, so you can't give up, because God makes the impossible possible. Okay, second truth that we see in this story is you have to change to get change. Now, here's the thing. In one arena or another, we all want to get better. We all want to heal in some way. We want to change. At least we say we do. We think we do. In November of 2004, a group of elite medical researchers and practitioners convened for a closed-door conference at Rockefeller University in New York. And the goal of the gathering was to get together the most brilliant thinkers in the world to tackle the current health crisis. Now, the outcome was both encouraging and discouraging. It was encouraging because they discovered that most health problems are not caused by factors beyond our control. And it was discouraging for exactly the same reason. The experts, the brightest minds in the medical field, determined that we're capable of solving most of our own health issues. Unfortunately, most of the time, we choose not to. Study after study identifies 5 behavioral issues that cause 80% of our health problems. Okay? Too much eating, drinking, smoking, stress, and not enough exercise. It's that simple. It's that difficult. With a few minor changes, we could solve most of our major health problems. But we don't want to. Now, I don't mean want as in wish or whim. Every single one of us would wish our problems away. But it takes more than a wish to experience lasting change. If we think of the word want, as we're talking about it here, if we think of the word want as defined this way, a deep-rooted desire and matching discipline to do what needs to be done, no matter how hard it is or how long it takes, then people want a lot less than they think they do. Look, no matter what goal you're trying to achieve or what problem you're trying to solve, you have to want it more than the pain that will be inflicted upon you in the process of trying to attain it. That's where 9 out of 10 of us fall short. And according to Dr. Edward Miller, who's the 13th dean of Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, more than 500,000 Americans undergo a coronary bypass graft every year. And while angioplasty effectively relieves clogged arteries, as we all know, okay, it's a temporary fix, right? Without change in eating and diet and exercise habits, okay, the health benefits will be short-lived. And patients are told this. Before the procedure, they're always told this. They're told this point blank. And yet, Dr. Miller notes, if you look at people after coronary artery bypass graft 2 years later, 90% of them have not changed their lifestyle. Now, it seems to me that every one of them probably wants to live, just not enough to change. If the numbers are right, okay, 9 out of 10 people would rather die than change. And I think Jesus was aware of this human flaw long before there was a study purporting it. And the ability of Jesus, this is what's so awesome about Jesus, the ability of Jesus to formulate the right question at the right time is nothing short of an art. And in this scene, Jesus asks what at first looks like it's a ridiculous question. I mean, as we're reading the story, are you like, that's a ridiculous question? He sees this invalid, he hears his story, sees what's going on, and then he asks, do you want to get well? Now, that's like an absurd question. It's like adding insult to injury. Of course he wants to get well. But that's not an assumption that Jesus made, because he knew better. You can't help someone that doesn't want help, no matter how badly they need it. Like the thief on the cross, not the one that cried out to Jesus for help, but the other one, the one that just sat up there and hurled insults at Jesus. That guy's like case in point. He's just a few feet away from salvation, but he curses the only one that could actually help him. One of the great arenas of Christian ministry down through the centuries is helping the homeless. And there are some great organizations currently like Vision House, which is a place in Mount Lake Terrace where we're starting a new partnership, and we'll kind of launch that in the fall. I'm very excited about that. But one of the challenges in trying to help the homeless, especially if the long-term goal is that they not be homeless anymore, one of the primary challenges, as you all know, is motivation. I mean, there are many homeless people that have gotten homes and jobs, and somebody's come along and they've helped them, and they're in a different spot. But for every success story, there are some who just resist change, even change for the better. They'd rather live off of welfare than get a job and make a home. They'd rather just keep doing what they're doing than to actually get well. It's so easy to get accustomed to our crutches, isn't it? Or in the case of the man in our story, okay, the invalid, his mat. His world consisted of 8 square feet. He went through the same routine day after day after day. And while it was certainly monotonous, you have to think about this, it was also safe. It was predictable. In fact, his mat may have kind of been his security blanket. But if you want to get well, you can't just keep sitting on your security blanket. You can't just keep doing the same old things, going to the same places with the same people in the same way, doing the same routine, the same safe routine. If you want to get well, you have to eventually get rid of your mat. Like you have to roll it up and throw it away. And I think Jesus is looking squarely at you and me and asking, do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? And this is a serious question that gets at a deep-seated issue. For the invalid, getting well meant getting a job. It meant actually using his healed legs. It meant a new level of responsibility to society. Like every blessing from God, it came with responsibility. To get well, his life would have to change dramatically. Have any of you ever heard of the law of requisite variety? Anybody heard of that? Casey's kind of heard of it. Not a baby. You're saving us. I hadn't heard of it until a couple of weeks ago. I was reading something. But it's basically this. The survival of any system depends on its capacity to cultivate variety in its internal structures. Some of you are like, what? Okay, in other words, to thrive, you have to keep changing. Prolonged equilibrium is actually bad for us. Like too much predictability and safety is actually harmful. Now, most of you are aware that like in the realm of exercise, I know we've got some serious exercise buffs among us, routines eventually become counterproductive, right? Those of you that work out, you know that. If you exercise the same muscles in the same way all the time, your muscles will eventually start adapting and they'll stop growing. Your workouts eventually will become less and less effective. To get them growing again, you need to disorient them. You need to shake it up. You need to do something different. You need to do a new exercise in a new way or at a new intensity level or something. And the same is true with a human soul. There has to be some degree of disequilibrium. There has to be challenge. There has to be unpredictability. We can't just sit on our mat all day, every day, and then expect to grow and thrive. Now you think about it. We say we want to grow and we want to thrive and we want to change. We say we want to get well. But very often, we structure our life, so that we can stay nicely on our little mat. Our whole life is structured around making sure I don't have to get off of my mat. We only say yes to stuff that's safe, that's predictable. We say yes as long as it's something we can do while we're still sitting on our little mat. I just want you to do a little self-analysis. When is the last time you intentionally pursued disequilibrium in your life? Like, how open have you been to doing something different? Are you saying no in your life these days to things that will stretch you? Are you avoiding things that might rock you a little bit? Because if you think about your soul and your heart like a muscle, when is the last time that you mixed up your workout? Now, maybe you're sitting here and you're thinking, That's great, Jason, but this is kind of vague. What exactly are you suggesting that I do? Do you want me to go for Thai food for lunch and order the 5-star? What aspect of my routine am I supposed to be mixing up? What kind of risks are you suggesting that I take? And I just want to say, obviously, look, I can't get too specific with any of you about this. This is such an individual thing. But here's one way to think about it. And I got this from a guy named Bob Goff. Here's one way to think about it. Try this. This is what he said. He did a little experiment in his life and came up with this idea years ago and sort of has lived by it. He says, say yes to everything you can. Say yes to everything you can. Like when you get invitations and you get opportunities and they seem like they're out of your league, or they seem like they're going to be way out of your comfort zone or outside of what you'd normally do, you say yes to as much as you possibly can. When you get invitations that will get you off of your mat, then as much as you possibly can, within reason, you say yes. And so my challenge to you is this. Start looking for things in your world that you can say yes to. Now, I have a good friend that started doing this a few years ago. And it's leading him to some wild places. He got invited to lead Young Life a few years ago. And he thought, I don't know, I'm pretty new to following Jesus myself. Not really a great example. And I don't really know very much of anything. But in spite of that, he said yes. After a few months, someone said, hey, you should give the talk at one of the gatherings. And he thought, are you kidding? Like me? What would I say? But in spite of that, he said yes. And it turned out that he was kind of a natural. So he got invited to give more talks. And every time he said yes. And then someone came along and said, hey, I'm going to a developing country to do some ministry. I'd like you to come with me and lead youth groups. And he thought, but I don't speak the language, and I don't know the culture, and I'm not really an expert on youth groups or anything. I just lead Young Life, and sometimes I give talks. But in spite of that, he said yes. And he went, and he was awesome. And for 4 nights, he battled issues like darkness and road noise. And he did Young Life in Haiti. And he gave a talk every night. And he was amazing. Now, on that trip, there was a pastor, a very good-looking pastor. And he saw Casey. And he thought, man, that guy is really gifted. So the pastor's wife, who is this amazing lady, said, maybe you'd want that guy to preach at church sometime. And this very insightful pastor thought, that's brilliant. I was actually thinking the same thing. So he went to the guy and he said, hey, I really sense that God has gifted you and might want to use you in a different and new way. Would you be willing to preach at church? And the guy thought, that's crazy. Me giving a sermon in church, that's nuts. And he's like, the idea terrifies me. But in spite of that, he said, yes. And he did, and he was good. And as you know, over the last year or so, Casey Ellersek has preached several more times. I keep asking him, and he keeps saying yes. In fact, Casey made a conscious decision a while back, and he decided, he read the Bob Goff book, and he decided to say yes to as much as he possibly could. And all of a sudden, as you look at his life, you see that doors are swinging wide for him right and left. And as many of you know, he'll be moving to Australia in January. He's going to be going to Bible college at Hillsong. Now, he has no idea where that's going to lead. He doesn't have a clear picture for the future. But someone challenged him to consider Bible college. And again, he said, yes. And so off he will go. But I'll tell you what, you want to see growth in a life? You want to see somebody getting well in a hurry? Here's a guy that just keeps getting off his mat. He keeps saying yes time and time again. Now, again, maybe you're sitting here and you're thinking, okay, thinking about me. Look, if saying yes to stuff means I'm going to end up in Australia at Bible college, I think I'm going to keep saying no, thank you very much. I have no idea where saying yes might lead you. But here's what I do know. Okay, according to the law of requisite variety and just common sense of watching people, too much routine is really, really bad. You need some disequilibrium. And every time you say no when you could say yes, every time you resist something because it's new or because it's hard, you miss an opportunity for your heart to come alive. The longer you sit on your mat, the more your soul will atrophy. So I just want to ask you, how open have you been recently to new, hard stuff? And maybe it's time to change your mantra from no to yes. Jesus said to this man, get up, take your mat, and walk. And he did. And that leads me to just one quick final thought. You are more than a label. The fact that this disabled man has been known for 2,000 years simply as the invalid is no small thing. It'd be like me introducing myself to you as the dyslexic. Now, I realize that in the Bible, we're introduced to a lot of people. And in many cases, they aren't given names, just labels. There's the prostitute with the alabaster jar. There's the man born blind. There's the woman caught in adultery. And that just goes on and on and on. And their identity has become synonymous with their sin or their illness, with something that's wrong with them. But if there's a lesson to be learned in all of these cases, it's this. Don't let what's wrong with you define you. If you haven't noticed, our culture tends to reduce people to labels. Not only is it unhealthy and unholy, it's dehumanizing. Don't let anyone label you except the one who made you, the one who knows who you really are, the one who knows what you can really be. Now, I don't know what your label was. I don't know what your labels have been. I don't know what your label was in school growing up. Maybe you were a jock, dumb jock. Maybe you were a nerd, a smart nerd. Maybe you were a dumb nerd. Were you a partier? Were you a slut? Were you a stoner? Were you the dumb kid? Were you the weird chick? I don't know what your label is in your family. Are you the irresponsible one? Are you the angry one? Are you the unfaithful one? Are you the one that wasn't there? Are you the one that didn't make it? Are you the one that wasn't as gifted? I don't know what your label is at work, and I'm not even going to try to give a list of labels that they might have for you at work. But you know that there are people there that see you a certain way, and in a sense, you've been labeled there. So I don't know what it might be for you. But here's what I know. If you let someone besides the one who made you label you, you're going to be severely limited by your label. And as we talked about a few weeks ago, nobody was more impetuous, nobody was more of a loose cannon than Peter. I mean, he was totally inconsistent, unreliable. He was up and he was down. Sometimes he was amazingly right, and sometimes he was horribly wrong. And yet Jesus changed his name from Simon to Peter. Peter means rock, and Jesus is saying, okay, you're going to be the anchor of my movement. And he was. He became that. God knows you. God sees you. And you are so much more than your label. And so I just want to invite you, let him tell you who you are. Don't let your old friends, don't let your coworkers, don't even let your family tell you who you are. Leave the label behind and let God do something new.